OpenAI has figured out a way to become intertwined with the major pillars, most of the major pillars of the U.S. tech industry, in ways that raise questions about, well, what happens if they can't fulfill these deals? What happens if it fails? What happens to the U.S. economy?
Welcome back to The Important Part, a podcast about achieving financial independence by making smart investments in yourself and your portfolio. I'm Liz Thomas, your host and head of investment strategy at SoFi. Today we're talking about the kind of high-stakes business decisions where billions of dollars, entire industries, and even the future of technology hang in the balance. From Elon Musk betting his entire fortune on electric cars when everyone said it was impossible, to Apple building a $3 trillion empire through its App Store, to AI companies possibly becoming the next too big to fail. These aren't just business stories, they're lessons in risk-taking, decision-making under pressure, and what separates transformative bets from catastrophic failures. To help us understand how the world's most powerful business leaders make their biggest decisions, we're joined by Tim Higgins. Tim is a business columnist for the Wall Street Journal, where he covers influential companies and their leaders. He's the author of 2 acclaimed books, Power Play, Elon Musk and the Bet of the Century, and the new book, iWar, Fortnite, Elon Musk, Spotify, WeChat, and laying siege to Apple's empire, which came out in September. And he's the co-host of the Wall Street Journal's Bold Names podcast.
This podcast is sponsored by SoFi to help you get your money right and is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this program is a recommendation from SoFi. You should not rely on this program for any financial, legal, or tax advice or recommendations. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the institutional views of SoFi or its affiliates.
Tim, welcome to The Important Part. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about this. So let's start by telling our listeners who you are, what you do, background, right? You're a journalist. Background is that you started covering the auto industry in Detroit. In 2007.
Yeah.
Motor City. And this was right before the financial crisis, the auto industry collapsed, or at least the U.S. auto industry collapsed. So you went right into the fire. Absolutely. As a journalist.
Yeah.
Was that the first crisis you covered?
Well, I'd been a reporter for several years beforehand, but really became a business reporter in Detroit. And I remember the editor's pitch to me was, come to Detroit. I know you want to be a political reporter. We'll send you to D.C. And I had been a political reporter, and I said, I don't know anything about cars. And he says, it'll be simple. We'll put you on Chrysler. Nothing ever happens. And this was
Famous
January 2007. And within a few weeks, all options were on the table for Daimler Chrysler.
Yeah.
On the eventual unwinding of that marriage made actually in hell. It was dubbed the marriage made in heaven. And it was just wild after that. I mean, the industry had been on the decline, but then it just accelerated because of all of the legacy problems. Ended up covering the General Motors bankruptcy and just got deeply into the world of business and picked up an MBA while I was at it and just kind of went full force into becoming a business reporter.
Well, and on the manufacturing side of the economy too. And this is years ago now, but our economy has shifted a lot from manufacturing into services. Yeah. But that period of covering, the auto industry, manufacturing, watching people lose their jobs, that was all of the factories shutting down, and Detroit just entirely changing as a city for a long period of time, and the mergers and acquisitions.
It was very primal. I mean, this was, it's very easy to read the business pages and be detached from it.
Sure.
You and I focus a lot on the stock, is it going up and down, right? But in a place like Detroit, especially then, a company town really, these were more than just stock symbols. These were vital parts of the economy, vital parts of life. And so it was, one day I might be talking to the workers on the factory floor, spending a lot of time in factories, understanding how this process worked with the suppliers. And you really saw how the ecosystem, how it all fits together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so on to what you do now. Then you switched to covering Silicon Valley, tech companies, and it's still what you're doing today. You've penned 2 wonderful books on these topics. Generally, you cover leaders of big tech companies, how their decisions impact the company. Maybe you cover the brand and the other things that are going on behind the scenes, not necessarily the stock price move directly. But if we had to compare, you've got auto industry CEOs and then you've got tech industry CEOs, totally different characters, I can imagine. But what would you say are the biggest differences? And it could even be what are the differences between the decision making in the industry, but what are the biggest differences between manufacturing CEOs and tech CEOs?
Well, I would disagree with the kind of one of the underlying thoughts there, because I spent a lot of time in Detroit, got deeply involved in the history of Detroit. And in a lot of ways, Detroit was the Silicon Valley of its day. I mean, you go back 100 years, right?
Sure.
And you had these massive egos. You had these massive ambitions. The world was literally changing on a daily basis, right? I mean, these people were the startups of their era, right? And so Henry Ford or Billy Durant, kind of the founders of the U.S. automotive industry, were as interesting and as big a characters, if you will, as Elon Musk or Sam Altman of today, right? So in some ways, I see a lot of similarities there. Today, I think the difference is that, autos clearly are not on the forefront of innovation. A lot of the U.S. companies are not on the forefront of innovation. Tesla probably is. Now I know the people in Detroit are going to write in and you're so wrong. I get what you're doing. You're doing a lot of good stuff, but they're not changing the world in the same way perhaps as some of the companies in Silicon Valley, right? And so the stakes, the money, the things that are changing in the world are just so much more dramatic in Silicon Valley and the tech industry. Today, that it just leads for just higher drama, right? Which I think a lot of people are attracted to, these great generational bets that are being made that the world is going to look a lot different 20 years from now than it does today. And that's just inherently interesting.
Okay, so speaking of drama, one of the companies and the people that you have covered a lot, you're very well known for covering, is one Mr. Elon Musk and Tesla. Yeah. You've followed Tesla. First of all, that seems like a good pairing of auto industry to now tech companies, put them both together, and that seems like the perfect path, at least to kind of get your feet wet in that
Absolutely.
Side of things. So you've followed Tesla through many, many, many twists and turns, many, many decisions by Elon, many, many near failures, right, of the company and a lot of different reinventions. Elon is well known for making headline news for decisions that he's made or statements that he's made, high stakes decisions. With the benefit of hindsight now, looking back on everything that's happened up until this point, what are some of the decisions that Elon has made about Tesla that seemed totally insane at the time? Everybody thought they were insane, maybe you included, but they worked out and it turned out to be the right move.
Yeah. Tesla had a shareholder meeting the other day. And during that time, it was a classic shareholder meeting where, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of big talk about the future. He's very much thinking about this company making a dramatic pivot towards robots, whether it's humanoid robots or robot cars. And he's talking about just the needs that they're going to have for this world that he imagines, this dramatic change is going to be coming. And one of the kind of the supply chain needs, he's saying, is microchips, right? And he's got deals, he says, he's planning on getting them from TSMC, from Samsung, maybe even Intel. But even though he's got all of these contracts and all these plans, he doesn't think that they can make enough, right? So he's starting to float the idea that Tesla might have to start making its own chips, which is incredibly hard, incredibly complicated, incredibly capital intensive. And I think some people might roll their eyes at that because that's what are you doing, man? Stay in your lane. There's plenty of chip makers out there. And it reminds me of a period, go back more than, many years ago, go back to, it's 2013 period. The Model S is out. That's the full-size sedan that Tesla made. This was kind of, you had the Roadster, which was really kind of a science project that Tesla, they used that to kind of show the idea that electric cars could be cool and sexy. And the Model S was going to be a car that was the world's best car that just happened to be electric. And the company was going to make it itself for the first time. And this was a huge lift. And once it comes out, we're seeing the first kinds of signs of what Tesla can become. And Musk starts to talk about the next phase of Tesla, and that's going to be what we know as the Model 3, a sedan for the masses. And he starts doing the math, and he's like, well, the world just, he needs the entire world's supply of lithium ion cells. And lithium ion cells are those fat finger, at the time, they were fat finger sized cells that make up the battery packs, thousands of them in a car, wired together to power it, right? And that's the Tesla, that's how it works, right? And he was just going to need, the world's supply.
A lot.
And he starts talking about, well, their supplier, Panasonic, they don't, and so he wants to create their own battery facility, and they start talking about this, and he would go on and about this. Eventually he got Panasonic to partner in the US, but it's that kind of long-term thinking in the near term, like in the next 10 years, I'm going to need everything the world's got. And a lot of people rolled their eyes at that at the time and said, like, come on, man. I mean, look how many electric cars you're selling. Look at the projection for the entire world's need for electric cars in the next 10 years. The forecasts were nowhere near what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And it turned out that in a lot of ways he was right, that he did need all of that production that he was talking about, right? And one of the limiting factors would often be his ability to get cells. And so he had to build up for the future in a time when people did not see the future that he was seeing. And so, I think about that as he talks about these fabs for microchips. I don't know if he's going to need them. There's a lot of things in the way of this future that he talks about of humanoid robots. Experts might argue that he's not there yet, but you got to build the rails to get the train there, and that's kind of what he's talking about.
Do you think there's a chance the reason that the demand was there, particularly for Tesla, did it have to do with almost a lack of a competitive environment for them for a long time? So a lot of the traditional automakers didn't quite get there yet, or maybe they tried but failed at first, right? Their electric vehicles or their hybrids didn't have as much uptake with the consumers as they expected. So Tesla was the only option for a long time. And there have been others that have entered now, but for all intents and purposes, they had a little bit of a monopoly on the electric car. I know monopoly is a dirty word, but they had a little bit of that on the electric vehicle industry. And anytime something is so new, right, consumers struggle to trust it, but you've got this now established brand, this established person, whether you think he's nuts or not, and that's what they were comfortable with. So people just kept buying Teslas. What if the competitive environment had been more competitive, right? Sure. Then would he have needed to do some of this stuff?
Well, I think if there had been electric cars out there, he wouldn't have done it. It was, the original idea of Tesla was to show the world that electric cars could be cool, could be functional, could be potentially profitable. The idea that to urge and kind of nudge the auto industry to follow into these footsteps, right? That's kind of the original idea. And Musk would say now that he didn't think that Tesla didn't have much of a chance because of all of the things against them, right? Well, there wasn't a competitive electric car market at the time. The automotive industry was brutally competitive, right? And there just wasn't a belief that people really wanted electric cars, in part because car companies, to your point, they had been experimenting and playing with electric cars for years. They thought the consumer, the person that was going to want to buy it, was going to be motivated by concerns of economy, right? And so it was a kind of a race to the bottom of making kind of the car that would appeal to somebody who's cheap and buying it because they want to save on gas, right? And so you really a lot of times just had these science projects that looked weird, that didn't really perform very well and were small and kind of nerdy. And Tesla's idea was, let's put sex on wheels. And the fun thing of an electric car is that torque, that 0 to 60, you're at the stoplight and you hit the accelerator and it's a roller coaster, right? That was kind of one of the insights that really was the early days of Tesla, was make it cool, make it sexy, and build a brand of luxury, and then go to the masses. And that's what they did.
All right, let's move on to your newest book. This just released in September of 2025, called iWar, The Battle for the Digital Economy. Another company that you're very well known for writing about is Apple, and another company that's been around for a very long time. So you can go through the history of Apple, and obviously there are quite a few different leaders that we can talk about there. But we've got Steve Jobs, we've got Tim Cook. But the book called iWar, why don't you tell our listeners in your words what it's about?
Yeah, so everybody knows Apple, right? They make devices that really have changed the modern world, and it's the gateway for so many people, the iPhone, into the digital world. And that gateway is under attack right now. The position that Apple holds as the person letting people in through that gate. This idea that you could just open up the store on your phone, you could download third-party software, and it would just work, and it was seamless. And the barriers of entry were so small that developers could just try things.
Mostly for the App Store.
Yeah,
right? This not for hardware. They're not doing this on the hardware basis, but
right.
the App
You
Store.
make a good point there. Remember early on, some of the early apps would be like, they were just kind of like party games, right? Like it was like iBeer, where you could hold it up and guzzle, and this is like, and it made the creator like a ton of money, and it was like a gold rush for like small developers to see what they could do, and it's not unlike. It reminds me, it's not unlike that period we are in now with some of these AI applications. Like you see these videos that are being created by OpenAI's software, and people are like, well, that's frivolous and not important. Well, that's kind of how new technology in some ways debuts. It's people are playing with it and seeing what's possible, right? And very quickly, companies realized that there was this potential market out there in the app economy, right? And we saw the rise of really world-changing companies, right? Uber, Instagram. I mean, look what happened with Facebook. I mean, they started on the desktop, but then they evolved into mobile. And these are behemoths now.
What you're paying for, at least the way that I would see it, what you're paying for is access to all of their customers.
Right.
And many of us, I mean, even when you're texting somebody, right? When the text comes across green, it's rare. When it's not blue, it's green, it's rare.
Right.
So most people, at least in my universe, most people, I think, in New York City, most people in America still have an iPhone. They're on that operating system. So they've got this tight ecosystem. And a lot of reasons why it stays so tight is because it's such a pain in the butt to switch, right? If I have to change everything, like coming off of that particular cloud and coming off of the music and like all the different things, right? My headphones and everything that's intertwined, my watch and like all of it, it's difficult to get out of. And on some level, it's like, well, kudos to Apple for developing that ecosystem. That was the point, wasn't it?
They created the perfect mousetrap, right? Essentially, they created this, I think of it as a digital world, right? They created a place that we are all living in. The counter argument of that would essentially be that they've outgrown it. Like the world has, they have created this world. It is a utility in a lot of ways. It's like, you think of it as like the telephones, AT&T, right? Like people are now operating through those lines, and should they be able to control the freedom of business and the freedom of speech and these sorts of freedoms, right? And there are companies such as Spotify and Epic Games and regulators in Europe and in the US who think they have too much power. So it is the story of the efforts around the world to kind of rein in Apple's power. And it is a great corporate drama, in my opinion, because you've got all of these interesting characters, guys who made enormous bets for their company, but then made these really huge risky bets to take on Apple as that gatekeeper. It's interesting. Some would say Apple is entitled to the 30%, up to 30% take that it gets on in-app purchases for various services, whereas others would say that's too much. They're demanding too much. They got too many rules. It's too opaque. We don't understand. They can come at us, and that's great tension.
Yeah. Now we've covered Tesla, we've covered Apple. We all know who the big leaders are in both of those stories, but they're not the only companies that you've ever covered. So you've been doing this for over 15 years, these big gambles that CEOs take and these corporate near-death experiences that they go through, right? So can you give us, what have you learned about how those types of leaders make decisions? Is there something different about them?
Well, everybody's different, right? They all kind of approach it. One of the things it's hard to really understand in the abstract is the culture of these different places and how these leaders build the culture, keep the culture going, nurture it, and why that can be useful and why it can be harmful, right? You think about the General Motors pre-bankruptcy. This is a company that had grown up. At that point, it was roughly 100 years old. It had this incredible backstory. incredible, like, deep roots, and there was reasons why it became the way it was, right? And that culture very much was under attack during the bankruptcy process, and the bankruptcy was seen as an opportunity for a reset of that culture. You think about a company like Tesla, Musk got to create the culture of what he wanted there. And one of his superpowers today is his ability to sell a vision for the future, not just to customers, but also to investors who continue to fund his adventures, if you will. And that's really been supremely important in the history of all of his companies, is keeping people excited so he can keep going until he could make Tesla a sustainable company, that he could get it onto its feet. Because remember, car business is a cash-intensive business. It eats money for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's why you rarely see a startup car company make it very long. Because you might be able to make it for the first few years, but it's getting where the next hump. It's brutal. It's tough, right? So, there's a kind of an example of some of the culture that I think is so important.
Yeah. Well, you haven't written a book on AI yet, but you recently...
The day's still young.
Yeah, right. Yeah, come on, Tim. You recently wrote an article about OpenAI, titled, "Is OpenAI Becoming Too Big to Fail?" And I think many of our listeners are probably at least somewhat familiar with the OpenAI story. Many of us have seen the circular funding diagram, right? OpenAI has a really big bubble in that diagram, and there have been headlines about the company even just in the last couple of weeks. So talk to us about that premise, right? Is it becoming too big to fail? I think many of us are starting to worry about that, and maybe there are other companies in that ecosystem that are becoming too big to fail. And now this recent chatter about a government guarantee for their spending.
Being in the Valley, being in Silicon Valley, I'm based in San Francisco, being close to a lot of these startups, it's not uncommon for there to be a lot of attention on the next big thing, right? I mean, people like that excitement. It inspires. You think about what could potentially be. Investors think about who they could disrupt, what's the potential, the new world, right? And, you spend enough time there and you see winners and losers. The exciting, sparkly thing might be dull in the next few years, right? That's just the natural kind of progression of things. But it's very kind of rare to have a conversation about a startup when people start to say, what happens if it fails? What happens to the U.S. economy, right? And what I mean by that is, because of these circular deals, OpenAI has figured out a way to become intertwined with the major pillars, most of the major pillars of the U.S. tech industry, in ways that raise questions about, well, what happens if they can't fulfill these deals, right? It's amazing the valuations that have been increased or created, the paper valuations for some of these major tech players by deals announced with OpenAI, right? And so it's all based on the idea that OpenAI is going to be spending all this money on, whether it's chips or cables or infrastructure needed to build out the data centers that they're going to need to build the AI that they want for the future. And it's all occurring in a time when the U.S. government has kind of embraced a policy of national champions. Like, they have kind of taken efforts to help Intel to salvage the kind of situation there, definitely taking a big step in trying to encourage AI development in the U.S. It's seen as not only a national security, but an economic security issue. A lot of concern about the U.S. economy, if not for the spending in AI and AI infrastructure. And so all of these things are kind of percolating at a time when what happens, I think it's a fair question to say, well, what happens if OpenAI doesn't do what it's supposed to do, right? And, I think a lot of debate. Now, David Sachs, the White House AI czar, has come out and said, hey, there aren't going to be bailouts. Okay, I've heard stuff like that before.
Sure. Yeah.
OpenAI says they are not too big to fail. If they fail, they fail. And but it's part of this kind of broader question that we're having, I think, as a society, when we talk about AI and what is it we want the world to look like from this technology. Elon Musk the other day at that shareholder meeting at Tesla talking about how AI is really going to be the boss going forward, right? That eventually it's going to become so smart that it's going to kind of rule us. And he wants it to be a benevolent ruler, right? Well, there are some who are basically saying, well, do we really want that? And then the counter to that is, well, the Chinese are going to do it, so we want to make sure that our AI, we're there with that. I had an interview with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice earlier this year, where she basically was saying that if we don't want a James Cameron Terminator future, but if there's going to be a Terminator, we don't want it to be a Chinese Terminator. We want it to be a U.S. Terminator. And that's kind of the soup that we're in right now, and as we talk about kind of the future, in large part because we're at one of those moments with technology, just like we were talking about with the Mac back in the day or the iPhone, where we can see the glimmers of something, but we don't know how it's going to play out.
Do you think the motivation, now that you mentioned we don't want it to be a Chinese Terminator, do you think some of the motivation, or maybe a majority of the motivation, is we just have to be faster than China? Or is the motivation more altruistic of we want to provide this new thing for consumers?
Well, it's probably all of the above. It depends on the day, depends on the person, depends on the company, right? I mean, it is interesting to look at China's advancements in AI, but also through the lens of electric cars, right? They have very quickly become a world player in the electric car space to the extent that U.S. companies are very concerned about what happens if they make it to the States. You look at Europe, they're quickly gobbling up market share there. And, you kind of put that kind of idea to AI, and there's real concern, right? That China is fast, and they are determined, and they have made it kind of their national policy in these various areas. And they've shown that when they do that, ultimately they're going to, try to be very good at it, right? And so there's this real concern about China in the AI space. But there's also, you have to take some of these companies and their leaders at face what they say. They do see potential for a lot of good, right? There's a lot of excitement about things that occur in new material science, potentials in pharmaceuticals, potentials in kind of using this technology as a tool to unlock kind of the next step in all sorts of interesting areas. So there's this potential of great good, and then a potential of, well, we don't know how some of our competitors or rivals might use it. I mean, you can put China as a rival, or you can put, if you're a company, you're brand X compared to you. You're worried that they're going to figure out a way to unlock this technology. That's part of the conversations that I've heard and been having with people for months now. Is they're not sure where it's going, but they want to make sure they're playing with it so they can be ready.
Having watched many CEOs make these big decisions and perhaps watching different cycles of innovation, do you see any signs right now that CEOs of mega cap tech companies are making risky decisions or getting further on the risk spectrum, maybe a little over their skis on this AI stuff? Is there a general theme of that, or do you still feel like it's a pretty natural stage of innovation?
I'd frame it this way. It's very interesting to watch some of these big players and how they are making those bets, right? Let's look at it through this lens. You've got Meta, right? Facebook's parent. Mark Zuckerberg clearly spending a ton of money in AI, right? Here's a guy, he spent a ton of money in AR, VR. Right now it's AI, super intelligence, personal super intelligence as he talks about it. He sees it as a game changer, right? It goes back to iWar and goes back to the app economy. Facebook always kind of concerned that Apple had too much say over kind of that app world, and a lot of people are accessing Meta's properties, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, through the app economy. You don't really want somebody who can control your world, right? And there's been tensions there. Clearly, Zuckerberg sees AI, and a lot of other people do too, as a way of creating a new balance in tech, right? Does Apple control this new world? He sees the device gateway, that the gateway to this digital world is the glasses, his AI glasses, right? So they're making a huge gamble that they can displace Apple in a lot of ways. Where you watch Apple and its efforts in AI, I think the criticism against Apple is that they're not spending the kinds of money that their rivals are in AI, and that has hurt them in that race. The benefit of that is that maybe the current trajectory isn't going to work out for these other companies, and it will be able to kind of skip burning this cash and go on to the next thing, or it can do what it's done in the past and catch up very quickly to provide a user experience that they think people will want, right? So you got two huge gambles going on just in those two companies alone, right? So that's an exciting. Does that mean it's a bubble? Well, a lot of interesting things get created in bubbles, right? You go back to the dot-com period, the infrastructure was laid for the world we live in now.
Yeah, well, and it was true. I mean, everybody thought the internet would change the world, and it did. It just didn't do it by 2001.
Yeah, I mean,
it happened over time.
Amazon.com is still a player, right?
I mean, it changed e-commerce forever. I talk about this a lot, that it did happen. It wasn't wrong as a theory,
right,
but it took us 10 to 15 years to figure out where all the use cases were,
right,
to figure out how companies were going to turn it into profit,
right,
to figure out that maybe some of the cost cutting wasn't going to be detrimental to the entire labor market of America. But it took a long time, right? So some of this, the risk that I struggle with on a lot of these AI companies is that, when we invest in a stock, we're looking at earnings on a 12-month forward basis.
right,
Maybe on a 24-month forward basis, but really your visibility beyond 12 months is poor because CEOs aren't telling you anything about that time period yet, at least not anything concrete. So a lot of those valuations are based on earnings of the next 12 months and then just sort of this hope and optimism that the next 24 months and the 24 months after that are going to continue on as everybody is expecting, and that ends up being a difficult proposition, right? Especially because we've watched innovation cycles before. Now, the argument would be technology is just so much more advanced. Innovation cycles don't take as long anymore. And that might be absolutely true, right? But I feel like I can say with pretty good certainty, AI won't have changed the world by like June of next year yet, right? At least not in all of the ways that everybody is expecting and the reasons that we're buying the stocks today. Right. So that's where some of the risk in those valuations comes in.
Well, it's also, it's interesting. I live in San Francisco, and I've been writing about autonomous cars, robot cars, for a really long time, right? And to your point, you go back a decade ago, and I was at so many dinners where people would be like, my kid's 5 years old, and he's never going to get a driver's license in 10 years from now, and blah, blah, blah. And, well, people are still getting driver's license, right? But when I walk my dog in the streets of San Francisco, the sight of robot cars does not even, it's not surprising. They're ubiquitous at this point.
Right.
We do have this technology now. And it's like slowly and then all of a sudden, to steal the common internet meme at the moment, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it's going to be big, and then we kind of go into that trough of disillusionment. It's hard, it's messy, it's never going to happen. I remember talking to so many experts just 3 or 4 years ago that autonomous cars were just, investors had lost interest in it because it was just going to be too expensive. It wasn't happening, blah, blah, blah. Go to Austin, Texas right now, and that is the battleground for Robot Central, right? You have very interesting business models occurring there. Uber is deploying Alphabet Waymo's driverless cars in its app, right? So that's how you get the robot car, is in the Uber app, and it comes, and I think they got about 100 of them, and it's a hybrid system. So they don't have to have enough robots to handle the entire market. They can augment it with humans, the human Uber drivers, right? It's very interesting. And then you've got Tesla, which has already deployed some of its robot cars. They're not quite fully autonomous yet because they still have a safety operator in there as well, but they're on the road. And we're going to have a real battle there between two different visions, because Tesla's vision is that they have their own app, they're deploying their own system, they're going to own some of the cars, and ultimately they think their Tesla owners are going to put their cars into the app, kind of like an Airbnb kind of situation, and we're going to see which happens there. And so to kind of getting that point, like, that's where I think a lot of people thought we were going to be like a decade ago, where they're kind of now. Sure. And so it happens.
Maybe it will change the world by June, and I will eat crow. So one of the things, just to close this all out, your books talk about this. I'm sure you've mentioned it in various articles. The human toll that these big bets take on the company, on everybody in it, right? You've got executive turnover, you've got burnout, you've got relationships that are ruined, whether in the headlines or privately, right? All of those different things. Is that, do you think, a necessary price to pay for innovation?
It's part of kind of the adventure of these things. I think some people are much better off from these experiments, and definitely some people are not better off, right? If you are a traditional car company or traditional auto worker, it's been a tough go for a long time in some of these markets, right? Making that transition has been challenging. It creates new opportunities in other areas. There are a lot of people who are very excited to be working at the Tesla car factory in Austin, Texas. The idea of a Texas car factory a generation ago would have been like a head scratcher. But now you got kind of a real industry. You got Toyota, you got Tesla. I mean, this is a place to be. You were the app developers. They were pretty excited to make all the money off of the iBeer and what's come after that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, sharing all of your knowledge. Thank you for writing so much for your audience and for the rest of us to read about this, because this era, this AI era, is making history, and we're living through something that I think we will all be able to look back on and say, gosh, I remember when I thought that, right? I think it'll be fascinating to look back at even just this day and say, I remember that I was thinking that things wouldn't be different by June of 2026, right? And we were talking about autonomous driving. So I'm excited to watch it all play out. So anyway, thank you, Tim. I learned a lot. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
Well, thank you.
Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your books Power Play and iWar are both available now. I highly recommend them to anyone who wants a deep dive on how Tesla, Apple, and the biggest tech companies make billion-dollar decisions. If you want more from Tim, check out his column in the Wall Street Journal or the Bold Names podcast. So major takeaways from that episode, there are so many, but the big ones that I want to focus on just to wrap this up. I thought it was fascinating when he talked about how early in an innovation cycle, it always happens the same way, in the sense that everybody's trying to figure out what to use this new thing for. And whatever this new thing is will seem frivolous to many, just because we already do it a certain way. So what we're experiencing right now in this AI life cycle is actually very similar to many of the previous innovation cycles that we've seen. Second big takeaway is on these decision makers and what they have to do and be in order to succeed. And the idea of just being fearless with it, even when everybody around you may be telling you that this next decision or this next choice is not the right way to go. There does have to be an element of gut instinct and a fearlessness about pursuing it anyway. And then the last piece that is something that is actually very near and dear to our hearts at SoFi, we talk about this all the time, and that is culture, and how much culture actually plays into how the decisions are made and how they trickle down to the rest of the company, and just even the company's image externally. It has a lot to do with the culture that these leaders build from within. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode again very soon. For more from me, read my weekly column in SoFi's newsletter, On the Money, and on the SoFi website, or follow me on X at Liz Thomas Strap. Follow The Important Part wherever you get your podcasts. The Important Part is produced by SoFi in partnership with Sony Podcasts.
Elizabeth Thomas is a registered representative of SoFi Securities LLC and an investment advisor representative of SoFi Wealth LLC. SoFi Invest encompasses two distinct companies with various products and services offered to investors as described below. 1. Robo-investing and advisory services are provided by SoFi Wealth LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor, SoFi Wealth. Brokerage services are provided to SoFi Wealth LLC by SoFi Securities LLC. 2. Active investing and brokerage services are provided by SoFi Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Clearing and custody of all securities are provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. Individual customer accounts may be subject to the terms applicable to one or more of these platforms. For additional disclosures related to the SoFi Invest platforms described above, please visit www.sofi.com/legal. Neither the investment advisory representatives of SoFi Wealth nor the registered representatives of SoFi Securities are compensated for the sale of any product or service sold through any SoFi Invest platform. For a full listing of fees associated with SoFi Invest, please view our fee schedule. For additional disclosures related to the SoFi Invest platforms, please visit www.sofi.com/legal. Copyright 2025 Social Finance Incorporated, all rights reserved.